In the last days of 2025, around August, there has been a lot of commotion regarding the arrival of an interstellar visitor, an interstellar object. It is not known what it is. It travels at great speed, it has atypical behavior, and it is definitely not from our solar system. So this has given rise to many ideas, many concepts, many statements. The UFO topic reaches its initial point when the bomb goes off in 1947. I think everyone has heard about that incident of flying saucers on Mount Rainier when the term flying saucer arises. Later, Roswell occurs, which was the supposed crash of an extraterrestrial craft. And from there on, well, this is madness. There have been abductions, sightings, accounts of close encounters of the first, second, third kind. The scale has grown into the expanded scale, the scale of 4 and 5 kinds, etc. Amid all this whirlwind, in 1950, a physicist, one of the great geniuses of our time, Enrico Fermi, or Fermi, in a friendly chat, while they were sharing an afternoon coffee, I don't know what they were doing, but they were chatting, and the topic of extraterrestrial life came up. Enrico, who, by the way, was a very open-minded, very creative man, put forth an idea known as the Fermi Paradox, and it is that he said, well, in the universe there are 100 billion stars. Well, in our Milky Way there are 100 billion stars. If just a few of these stars harbored life, we should already have made contact, but we have not. The Fermi Paradox is that theoretically there should be many galaxies throughout the universe that host life, and that this life, over time, would have developed technology advanced enough to travel in the universe, but that nevertheless we had not had firm and direct contact. So he proposed 2 possibilities. The first is that we were doing things wrong in our search, and the second, that there was no one out there. The Fermi Paradox remained very strong. However, in 1961, about 11 years later, an American radio astronomer, Frank Drake, also an expert in all this about radio telescopes to practically listen to the cosmos, to pick up radio signals coming from the cosmos. Frank Drake devised an equation. I'm not going to describe it to you. In fact, I am not a physicist. I am only a simple civil engineer who knows the mathematics proper to a civil engineer. Half of what is spoken in a physics setting is totally foreign to me. But, in summary, what Frank Drake did together with his team was to set out a series of variables, that is, a series of data, that in an appropriate combination would give us the possible civilizations that would exist in the galaxy. They did this by adding, for example, the lifetimes of a star, the time at which it reaches its maximum moment, the number of stars, etc., etc. Drake's calculation was devastating. Around 40,000 civilizations should be inhabiting the Milky Way, that is, our galaxy. That was worrisome. Of course, there were also those who debated that this was in his assumption. There were those who applied the same Drake equation and came up with 2.5 possible civilizations in the galaxy, and we were one of them, etc., etc. Everyone proposed different variables. They took data, but Drake maintained as an answer to the Fermi Paradox that there could indeed be life. If in the solar system, where you and I float, on our beautiful blue sphere, there is life, and intelligent life, and life that has developed a technological capacity, it was logical to think, from the equation and from probabilistic calculations, that there would be other civilizations within our galaxy. But moreover, after Drake's equation, some other analyses began to emerge. For example, some of these analyses posited something very noteworthy. The human species, Homo sapiens sapiens, as an intelligent and thinking species, has been upon the face of the earth some 14,000 years, perhaps a little more. Before that, it was mainly gatherers, hunters, and there was no sign of technologies nor of sophisticated thinking. However, with the appearance of writing, civilization begins turning into cities, societies, advances like pyramids, aqueduct systems, etc. Development, although slow, became stationary. For example, when pyramids begin to be built, people devoted themselves to that kind of construction, and took quite a while to develop new constructions. The process, however, was replicated. Just as in some civilizations in Asia and Africa that kind of construction arose, some 2,000 years later they arise in the Americas. That is, the process was similar. Little by little it was advancing. Then come the great discoveries of fires, metals, alloys that allow the development of new constructions, of new systems. And finally, the technological era arrives as late as the 19th century, when machinery begins to evolve and we enter fully into the industrial age and then, in barely 125 years, development, technological development, was no longer stationary. That is, we no longer designed ships that sailed with sails, and we sailed with sails for 5,000 years. No, now the advances were quick, successive. A device that generates electricity is invented. Electricity is distributed. With this we create not only lamps and light bulbs, but refrigerators, ovens, microwave ovens. And little by little we evolve, and this keeps running. And then someone invents a little airplane that was made of paper and was tiny, and suddenly we already have spacecraft in 125 years. We are talking about a galloping race. This has led some theorists to propose the possibility that if there is a civilization on some planet in our galaxy, in another solar system that is ahead of us by 1,000 years, technologically it would be incredibly superior. So they could have visited us. But of course, when Frank Drake or Enrico Fermi proposed their hypotheses and their paradoxes and their equations, they did not know something: the existence of exoplanets. Yes, in 1992, the first exoplanets were discovered. What does this mean? Stars that have planets in solar systems similar to ours. And little by little something more was discovered. In the 1990s, around 95, planets were found that could have conditions proper to harbor water in liquid state. For example, 51 Pegasi b. But the bomb arrives when in 2005 the star Gliese 581 is observed minutely, and it is discovered that it has planets. And not only planets, but that it hosts 6 planets, 2 of which could have temperatures between 0 and 40 degrees. Well, one of them could have 12 to 30. Ideal for life. Ideal for harboring water. Then the Fermi Paradox no longer looks so clear. And moreover, we see that Drake's equation makes sense because we have found very many exoplanets. Now the problem with Gliese 581 is that after it was announced with great fanfare that the X marks the treasure had been found in Gliese 581, a planet that would be in the 6th place, doubts arose as to whether it really was a planet or whether it was only a mass of gas or something similar. This caused many to become discouraged. But the reality is that the search continued, and with the arrival of new systems like the Kepler Space Telescope, they begin to realize that our planet is not so unique nor so strange, and some of them are really not that far. The Gliese 581 system would be, according to some calculations, 14 light-years away, and according to other calculations, about 20. Really, in cosmic distances, that is around the corner, but then a denomination arises. The Goldilocks planets. The Goldilocks planets refer to planets that could harbor the conditions proper for life. And do you want to know something dramatic? By 2020, the Kepler Space Telescope had found about 40,000 possible Goldilocks planets in our galaxy, exactly what that scientist Drake had calculated many years earlier. And this was getting more nerve-wracking because some of these planets were already closer, at only 12 light-years. Imagine, and this is something I want you to think about, if we in 125 years have developed telecommunications, smartphones, communication systems via sophisticated fiber optics, enormous computation capabilities, what could a civilization 1,000 years older have developed? What do they have that we do not have? You know, traveling in the cosmos surpassing the barriers of the speed of light. You know, how to make this jump in space. All right, up to here, everything I have told you is the kind of thing for us to have a coffee, you and I, debating crazy ideas. But here comes the dangerous part, and it is that also, some years ago, an author, Cixin Liu, wrote a trilogy of science fiction novels that precisely gave rise to the Netflix series The Three-Body Problem. I don't know if you've seen it. It is very interesting. He uses what he calls the dark forest theory. Well, it would be very extensive to speak about everything it implies, but basically what this man maintains is that the universe is a dangerous place. It is something like a dark forest where there are predators, and these predators seek to hide themselves, not to be seen. But when they discover someone, whether another animal, another predator, or anything, they hurry to destroy it precisely for fear of being discovered. It is a preventive elimination. That is more or less the hypothesis or the dark forest theory. And applied to the cosmos, it would be something similar. An extraterrestrial civilization that has its exoplanet over there around its star and is very content does not wish to be discovered to avoid another predator. That is, another planet with another civilization, discovering it and destroying it. And in fact, there are those who have gone further and propose that this kind of destruction would be a way to survive by preventing more primitive civilizations from developing. It is terrifying, but we already proved it when the great voyages on this same planet took place. The great discoveries in the time of Columbus, of Magellan, of all of them. Certainly, those who ended up losing were those who were very calm in their tropical paradise, and were discovered by Europeans who many times exterminated their cultures and their civilizations. They stopped at that. Stopped at not destroying the planet. But imagine a civilization so developed that it can travel in the universe and discovers that here there is an inhabited planet that can develop technology and that in fact has a technological footprint. It is a future danger. It destroys it before we even made a fuss or sent our valiant fighter pilots of the United States Air Force. The planet would be destroyed. The dark forest theory is an answer to the Fermi Paradox. Why have they not communicated? Why do they not want to? Essentially, that is it. But if we heed the dark forest theory, the ideal would be to keep silent, to keep ourselves hidden, do nothing, not be discovered. Travel incognito. Half the living beings on our planet do that. The natural camouflage of animals and of many bugs is a way to avoid being discovered and being devoured. Although, of course, there are also those others who use very showy camouflage with the sole intention of warning. Dawn, come near me, because poisonous. But I think we would not be that kind of bugs since our possibility of defense is very low. And you, right now as you are listening to me, surely you are thinking, where are we going? Where are we going with this? Certainly the dark forest theory sounds very sincere and very risky. The problem is that we already did it. We already opened that door, that dark door toward the dangerous universe, and hello, here we are. And if you don't believe me, let me tell you a bit. The radio emissions from this planet begin in the years, what do you like, 10, 15, 20 of the last century. When the boom of radio stations that send signals begins, many of these signals are lost. They are absorbed by our different protective layers, and they do not go anywhere. So they would not be detectable from the confines of the universe. Let's say, speaking of 15 or 20 light-years away, perhaps they would not be capturable. They could not discover that we were all here. We were doing very well, but later this begins to climb a bit, and the crazy idea of telling the universe that we are here begins to arise. In 1962, for example, a high-power message was sent, and it was sent from Eupatoria in the Soviet Union. Today, it is Ukraine, but there in Eupatoria was the RT-70, which was the planetary radar, an impressive system of great capacity that sent a signal equivalent to practically all the radio stations in the world. The signal was incredibly powerful. That radio signal said, "Peace, Lenin, USSR." 3 words in code, Morsen. And that was all. It was sent on several occasions, and the frequency used was varied. It was not always sent on the same frequency. Up to that point, that did not look like anything bad. Simply some Soviets playing with their radio telescope, sending signals. That's it. However, this matter turns out peculiar, because the signal was sent to the constellation Libra, precisely where Gliese 581 is, the star I told you about that may have habitable exoplanets. Well, that is not the only thing. In 1972, we are all very excited. The trip to the moon has been a success. The first humans to set foot on the moon, those who were bouncing, etc., etc. And there have been several trips. The space project is booming, and someone thinks up probes. These probes are a sort of satellite that are launched from Earth to travel through the cosmos. Pioneer 10 and 11 were two of these probes that were supposed to reach Jupiter, take photos, send information to Earth. It was something incredibly elaborate. Bear in mind that by 1972 the quartz watch was barely being invented. Computers were practically an adding machine like the ones that come in cereal boxes. But that is not all. Both probes carried some plaques. These plaques, placed in such a way as to be protected, included critical information, the location of planet Earth. Yes, and in addition they had this location, not saying we are the third planet, no, locating the solar system from pulsars, which are bodies of the universe, cosmic bodies fairly stable, fairly fixed, and fairly well known. Any civilization in the galaxy could know that those pulsars are there, and then they put a little diagram of which one would be planet Earth. And to top it off, they put some little drawings of a man and a woman. The idea was Carl Sagan's, the famous astronomer, that man from Cosmos, the television program that was thrilling. Well, they put it there, and they sent the little ships with the idea that in 5 years they were going to say, kaput. Well, no, they did not turn off. They kept traveling. Right now, they are not even in the solar system anymore. They went on their way. But they also had a detail. Both plaques within those crazy scientific ideas included a diagram of the hydrogen atom. It is supposed that hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. So they were using that to exemplify the dimension of human beings. If this is the size, and it is this, and it is this. Well, human beings have such a measure. It sounded like something very sophisticated to be easily understood. But it is understood that if someone can travel in the cosmos, well, they would know what it means. Do not lose that detail because my last point from the theories, the dark forest theory, what it tells us is, do not make noise, do not go out, do not shout, "Here I am," because they will eat you. And the first thing we did was send a message saying, "Peace, Lenin." What scientist comes up with sending that? USSR. They had everything to send something else and they sent that. But well, it does not matter. What the Americans did with Pioneer 10 and 11 was very similar. But it did not stop there. Both probes fulfilled their mission and went on traveling. Now they are millions of kilometers away, lost in the universe. Now then, if that were not enough, the two pioneers were sent, I think, to the constellation Taurus. In 77, the matter is tried again, this time with Voyager 1 and 2. This time, they were more sophisticated, much more elaborate, and instead of that little plaque, they had a record. It was a very sophisticated record with a very peculiar design because it was made among silicones, copper, and coated in gold. But this time, we went much further because it included information deliberately thought out for possible extraterrestrial contact. This was not a joke. It is 1977, and since the 1950s there are theories that point to human beings already knowing of the existence of civilizations. But in 77, it had not been demonstrated that there were even exoplanets. That was still very fanciful. But the scientists sent this. Again, Sagan and a lot of people got involved. This time the record included songs, music, a greeting in 55 languages, messages from world leaders. It included sounds of nature, sounds of animals, and a lot of information. And, again, information about hydrogen was included. The Voyagers were a resounding success. They are very far from the solar system and still function with many predicaments and many problems. But they have sent information all this time. If we do the math, it is 28 years. What does this mean? We have had a gizmo up there, well, in fact, several gizmos, saying, there is a planet where some folks live and they already left the solar system. And moreover, as they move away, they keep sending radio signals in which they transmit information to us. Hey, there are some people over there. There's a guy named Jose Ramon who is talking about some crazy things. Go see him. Not a good idea. But the matter does not end there. The information revealed key data about our physical constitution, even something about DNA. But the most serious part had happened 3 years earlier. 3 years before, a major remodel had been done at the Arecibo radio telescope. This radio telescope, which was a giant, today destroyed and abandoned, had the objective of picking up radio signals. Radio signals. I mean that if you have a radio station here in Puebla, and you have an antenna, and you emit a signal, that signal can come to leave the planet and be picked up on another planet. Well, if they had a device like the Arecibo radio telescope, someone would pick up that signal. The idea of this was to listen to the universe, and normally within the noises of the universe are these radio signals. Within the scope of the natural, each planet sends its own signal. It is not technological. They are simply signals proper to each planet, to its chemical, physical activity, etc. But in that year of 1974, an even more complex message was sent. The Arecibo message. It was a message where data were given about our chromosome, the human chromosome, about our carbon-based composition, about our planet, about the location, and there was even a figure of a human being. All this was sent in binary code, zeros and ones. Something very complex sent as a radio signal. It was something that only scientists could pick up. Do you know at what frequency it was sent? The frequency at which hydrogen vibrates, because it is the universal signal. Yes, it is the most abundant element. Each element emits a radio signal, a kind of identification. I'm not sure how it works. I'm not an expert. Forgive me if I say something that doesn't make much sense. But essentially, all the elements have a certain frequency, just like on the radio. If you move the dial on a home radio, well, it has the frequency 90. 89.3 FM megahertz has 1090, etc. Well, the Arecibo signal was sent with impressive power concentrated at the frequency of hydrogen, and the signal was aimed at the constellation Hercules to the Hercules cluster, a very tight group of stars known as Messier 13. It is 25,100 light-years away. But I repeat that in 1974 we did not know that we had stars with possibly habitable planets at just 14 light-years away. But along the way there are several of those planets. So, in a few words, what we did was open the door and say, here we are, and we are like this. We have this composition, we have these elements. Between 1999 and the year 2001, again from that device, the RT of Eupatoria, now as Ukraine, messages were sent to different stars. These messages, which were known as the teenage messages, were a call for entries that tried to be very nice. The idea was simple. Let's send messages to different stars. Which star do you choose? This was done over the internet. It was very primitive, but it was already in advance. So I think 6 stars were selected and various messages were sent again. Location, characteristics, genetic code. Well, once again we announced, here we are. For years, Earth scientists had been cautious and had devoted themselves to listening. The SETI system, or the SETI project, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, basically consisted of listening all the time. They were listening. This changed, and according to what I have understood, in the year 2010 a new project known as the METI project begins. METI is Messaging to Extraterrestrial Intelligence, sending messages to extraterrestrial intelligences. We no longer only listen, we are sending messages. And guess what happened? Stephen Hawking, the famous and genius of humanity, said to them, "It is a very bad idea." Historically, it is always a very bad idea for two civilizations to meet when one of them is technologically inferior to the other. Historically, it is a very bad idea. Hawking, who was also a physicist and a theorist of the highest order, maintained the same thing said by the dark forest theory. But human beings are sometimes a bit stubborn and a bit proud, and more messages have been being sent. In 2015, METI's messages have increased significantly. And what happens with all this? We have been talking for more than 30 minutes, and you must still be thinking, well, yes, it was a bad idea to knock, to open the door and shout, "Here we are?" But has there been any response? That depends a lot on how you want to see it. When I say it depends a lot on how you want to see it, it's that some of the possible answers were quickly belittled by official science. But that is neither strange nor new. The first event that has interested me was the famous WOW signal. On August 15, 1977, around 11:15 p.m., at the Big Ear radio telescope in the United States, an absolutely unusual signal was picked up. In the middle of the background space noise, which is constant, a concentrated signal appeared, that is, focused. It was not an open signal like what a planet usually sends or the explosion of a nova or the passage of an asteroid, but rather it was a concentrated, sent signal. In addition, it was a signal that lasted quite a while. It lasted 72 seconds. That, for a concentrated signal, meant that it was incredibly powerful. A calculation done years later of the energy that would have been required to send that signal calculated the equivalent of having a nuclear power plant just to send that signal. The exact origin is not known. Apparently it comes from the constellation Sagittarius. But the signal picked up by Jerry Amen was so strange that when the paper was printed, the computer captured this and translated it into letters and numbers. When he found that, he circled it in red and wrote, "Wow," from the amazement of what had been captured. The signal has not been identified. It is not known what it was there for, and there are several letters. The interesting thing about this detail is the frequency, that is, the tuning. If we speak of it as if it were a home radio, the frequency it had was the same as that of hydrogen. If you remember, our dear Arecibo message in '74 was sent at the hydrogen frequency. The Pioneer probes carried indications of the hydrogen frequency, well, of the element hydrogen. The Voyager records also. We were sending, and they answered us on the same wavelength. Today, it has been said that no, that it was probably a signal bounced from a cosmic body in a cosmic cloud with cosmic dust with a comet that was passing by there, that someone misinterpreted it. The reality is that it has not been repeated. It came from a very distant place. It is not clear from where, but some point to the idea that the WOW signal came from a star cluster that a little later will be the subject of discussion. The next part of the story that has also been much criticized was the Chilbolton crop glyph. A crop glyph is a drawing that appears by flattening the stems of plants in a crop. They are also known as crop circles. But this definitely was not a circle. This was something different. On August 21, 2001, in Chilbolton, in England, next to a radio telescope, in fact, just a few meters from the Chilbolton Observatory and radio telescope, there appeared a diagram that seemed to be a response to the Arecibo message. If the Arecibo message is presented in graphic form, it would be something like what I am showing you on screen. The Chilbolton crop glyph looks very similar, but the information is different. Whereas in the Arecibo one, which we sent at the hydrogen frequency, it was said that the basic compound was carbon, and all this, here it spoke of silicon. The code, or the genome that we set forth in the Arecibo one, here was changed, and in fact the figure seemed different. And not only that, but a sort of face also appeared a few meters away, of a different form, but a three-dimensional face. The design as such was complicated, because let me tell you that the Arecibo message was in binary code and not just anyone could have identified it, and much less repeated it. Especially since this happened at night and nearby were military installations that were active. How many people would have had to collaborate for this design to be made in one night and turn out so well that it could be read and identified? That is, it is not only a pretty drawing, but it has information. The different layers of the plants that were flattened translate into information, as if it were a computer code. What was going on? Obviously, it was said that it was a hoax, a crude hoax. It was even said that it was a joke by the scientists themselves because of the degree of complexity. It was said that it was a prank by the astronomers and scientists themselves who had played a little joke there. But it was there, and there were military people nearby. And there were two key reports. The first was in the afternoon of August 20th, when the area was flown over and there was no object nor anything strange there. The next morning, that is, a few hours later, there was a design so complex that, well, obviously everyone said, "They're nuts. That is a hoax." There are so many crop glyphs everywhere and they are all fraudulent. There is no such thing. But it seemed to be a warning. If we look at it from the other side of the coin. Yes, we already had the wow signal that told us about hydrogen, that told us that someone had received our message, and had answered us in the same coin, in the same way. This seemed to be a response to the Arecibo message. But did they send it to us in another way and finish the matter? No, of course not. And this is the part that worries me the most. The following year, 2002, another crop glyph appeared, this time in Sparsholt, near a radio telescope known as LOFAR. This time it was completely different. It was incredibly sophisticated. 110 meters long, 76 meters wide. A disk with ASCII code. That was the strangest part. This disk had a series of levels. The crops had been flattened at different levels. Higher, lower, which translates into a form of message in ASCII code. And besides, a huge face corresponding to the classic gray. I am showing you right now an image of that. This new diagram had an even bigger problem. Due to the size and characteristics, it was only visible from above, and again, it was very close to a radio telescope. Perhaps we are not listening, as the Fermi Paradox says. Perhaps we are not listening correctly. We are not using the right technology to listen, and they are answering us in this other way. But this message was also very, very delicate. Why? Because if you remember, the two Voyager probes carried records, and those records would work more or less like this. Of course, ASCII code is a completely terrestrial code, American Standard Code for Information Interchange. But it is something that is used a lot in radio transmissions, so it could make sense. But the most dramatic part is the message. The disk did not have encoded information of genetic codes, silicons, calciums, whatever. No. It told us something and a warning. Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. Believe there is good out there? We oppose deception. Conduit closing. And a code. Was this a hoax, or was it a warning? Someone heard our signal and is answering us saying, "Shut your mouth and stop sending signals." If you remember, in the Chilbolton message there was a face. This face did not seem to be that of an alien. It was simply a face. And if you remember, over the years it has been reported that some of the visitors are similar to humans. The Nordics, the Orientals, they are similar to humans. But in the case of the crop glyph I am talking about in 2002, there appeared the face of a gray. Could it be a joke again? Of course, yes. Why not? But then another strange thing begins to happen. First, by the 2020s, 40,000 exoplanets within the Goldilocks zone have been documented. And in 2017, an interstellar object arrives. Oumuamua, the messenger. There are those who translate it with a very long text, that it is messenger that arrives from a distant past. That is not true. The message Oumuamua is messenger. But by repeating muai, mua means first messenger. It was detected in 2017, and it was a long and narrow object with irregular motion, and it did not belong to the solar system. It came from far away, crossed at great speed, and left. What is strange about that? One of the astrophysicists at Harvard University, one of the directors of the Galileo project for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence and possibly habitable planets, a man of great training, Abraham Loeb, better known as Avi Loeb, with several degrees and with a lot of publications, dared. He ventured to say that this looked more like a technological object. And in fact, he mentioned that it could be the remains of a technological object. He did not state that there was an active intelligence. They were simply the remains of a technological object due to the shape, due to the trajectory, due to the irregularity of the object. Some time later, in 2019, a second interstellar body appeared. This is known as Borisov. In this case, it was argued that it is a comet, and many scientists agreed that it looks like a comet. Again, it appeared out of nowhere, reached the planet, reached the solar system, and left. In the case of Oumuamua, the same thing happened. They said it was an asteroid, a comet, the remains of such and such. Only Abraham Loeb, this scientist of Jewish origin based in the United States and a Harvard professor in personality, insisted that it could be something technological. But the cherry on the cake has just arrived this year. In July 2025, Atlas III, or I-Atlas, a new interstellar object was detected. But this time it is different. This object is having strange behaviors, changes in brightness, and extraordinary speed. The speed is on the order of 200 and some thousand miles per hour. It is an extraordinary speed, but it also has increases and decreases. It has a different ellipse that does not correspond to the gravity of the Sun. That is, it is not influenced by the Sun's gravity, which means that it could have its own propulsion and an active intelligence. Again, Avi Loeb intervened and published a series of observations in which he points out that this could well be a technological object. But unlike Oumuamua, which seemed to have no active intelligence but to be a remnant, this one does. The origin of Atlas is precisely the place where the Arecibo message was sent according to some calculations, and precisely the origin of this object. If these people who have declared it are right and are not lying or fantasizing, would be the same as where the wow signal comes from. So that is worrisome. Perhaps they warned us. Perhaps they sent us a little message, and we did not know how to understand it. And now they are coming to see us. The problem is that if the dark forest theory is fulfilled, we are in trouble, and we will only know this until December 2025, when this interstellar object has crossed behind the Sun and continues on its way. If it continues on its way, like John walking down the street, we are all very happy. If it turns around and comes here, we are in trouble because they would have discovered us. Of course, all kinds of accusations have also rained down on Avi Loeb, from fantasist, mistaken calculations, lack of information. He rushed to say things, he invented others. Well, it has been said that it is a comet because of the tail, because of all this. It has been said that it is a large asteroid, but an asteroid of 5 kilometers, although there are those who say as much as 20. It travels at an extraordinary speed, and certainly Avi Loeb is not a fanciful man. What he has answered is also very interesting. He has responded with Pascal's wager. This paradox says something like, if God exists, even when there is a very small possibility that he exists, it would be good to believe it, to believe that he exists. Why? Because even when there is a tiny possibility that God exists, according to the postulate, the price for having believed is infinite. So it is worth it. What Avi Loeb proposes is, if I am wrong, and it is not technological, nothing happens. Even if there were a minimal possibility that it is technological, that it is intelligently directed and is a threat to humanity, the possibility, even if minimal, it is better to be prepared. And certainly there have been several signals. What would you think? Tonight, I have not wanted to talk about demons, apparitions, ghosts. I have wanted to set forth something that could happen, and that for some theorists would be a very bad idea for it to happen. The dark forest theory adds to Stephen Hawking's opinion in 2010 when he said that more developed civilizations have always harmed the less developed ones. It would be worth rethinking what we are doing.